lot the encouragement notes to the Kairos boys. We are going to be studying today really interesting passage of scripture, interesting book, Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes was written by Solomon. And we've been studying his life. And the question I have to start out today is, what makes a man great? You want to hand those out for me? Make sure I've got one, which I do. It would be good if I know what I'm talking about. What makes a man great? My son John and I, John is a big, both my boys are big NBA fans. So, I don't know. It was last NBA season. He had gotten some tickets to a Pacers game. And so I met him downtown. He lives in Cincinnati. I met him downtown, and we parked our cars and we walked down to the stadium. And as we are walking along, as you might have experienced if you go to any kind of sporting event downtown, there were homeless guys with cops banging them, asking for change. Okay? Asking for money. Would you call those people successful?
I don't know.
Truck stops, yes.
Yeah, truck stops. Okay. Would you consider them to be great men? In our society, I think the answer would probably be no. Okay? No, they're out begging for money. We went to the game. We found our seats. We're watching the Pacers play. Professional basketball players. Would you call them great men?
Great athletes.
They're great athletes. Would you call them great men?
No.
They make a lot of money. I mean, we were watching probably 5 million or 10 millionaires at a time play basketball. But the Pacers were not a great team last year in terms of wins and losses. So were they great men? What makes a man great? What would you say makes a man great? Any ideas, Nancy?
Well, like if you are a man and you would like to be an elder at a church, I think you have to be able to control your own family before you are invited to be an elder.
Okay, so you're saying a great man would be somebody who controls his own family? So a great father or a great husband, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Okay, somebody else want to jump in here? What makes a man great? Yeah, Heather?
There's a quote, I think, by William Booth or something, the Salvation Army. He started this. The marker of the greatness of a man is their level of surrender. I think he said something.
Their level of surrender. Okay.
Something like that.
Okay. So the cynical side of me would say, so if somebody loses a war and they surrender, are they a great man? I know. I'm picking. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Sherry.
Well, I would think that to be great, you have to be filled with wisdom. Would be a piece of
You have to be filled with wisdom.
as part of that greatness.
Okay, we're talking about Solomon. Solomon's known for his wisdom that God gave him. God granted him great wisdom. Okay, somebody else want to jump in here? Jeff. Submission to Christ. Ken.
I sure wasn't great at 20 years old. I was pretty much a fool.
Okay, but you're not 20 years old anymore. You a great man now?
I'm studying.
Okay, all right. Sean.
Yeah, I think to be great, you have to have the spirit of God and favor of God, like
Okay.
grow in
The Spirit of God and the favor of God. Interesting. Yeah, Liz.
He has integrity. He does the right thing when no one
is watching.
Okay, all right. Anybody else want to jump in here? What makes a man great? Have we got an exhaustive list? Okay. Here's what happens in the book of Ecclesiastes. Solomon is an old man, and when he writes Ecclesiastes, he has done a lot of great things. And we're going to look at those here in just a second. He's done a lot of great things. And the Bible talks about the greatness of Solomon in not just one area, not just as a king, not just as a leader, but in different areas of his life. He was really quite eclectic. He had not only wisdom, we've talked a little bit about this, not only wisdom in just one area. A lot of times we would have a specialty. We go to school, we study something, and so we have a specialty, right? Some of you in here are tied to the medical profession. So if you were having some sort of ailment, you might want to pull somebody aside in the medical profession and say, hey, my elbow hurts. What do you think about that? And they would give you their professional opinion. Some of you are in the financial world. Okay. So if you were going to borrow money from a bank, you might pull that person aside and say, hey, what would I need to do to secure a loan? And they give you some advice, right? Some of you are in other areas. Some of you are engineers. Some of you work in schools. Some of you cook. Some of you do this. Some of you do that. You have your specialty. Solomon seemed to be one of these guys that didn't have just one specialty. He was a specialist in many different things. He was a scientist. If you want to call him that, he studied science. All right, he understood that. He was a businessman. And we're going to look at some of that. He did a lot of different things. He was a leader of an army. He was a leader of building projects. Huge building project, bigger than anything you could possibly think about today. We're going to look at some of that. Ecclesiastes is a look back on his life. Now, let me just give you a little caveat about Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is one of those books that you cannot just take a verse. If you take one verse out of Ecclesiastes, you're going to think this does not belong in the Bible. You have to take the book as a whole. So we're gonna look at chapters 1 and 2 today in there. Before we get there, let's look about how great was Solomon. 1 Kings chapter 9, excuse me, verse 10 through 28. We're gonna take a look at that. Let's go there. First Kings, it's on your top of your 1 Kings chapter 9, verses 10 through 28. Reads like this. At the end of 20 years, during which Solomon built these two buildings, the temple of the Lord and his royal palace. Let me just stop right there. 20 years in building two buildings that were incredibly grand. 7 years he spent building the temple. We've talked about that over the last few weeks, all the gold, the tons and tons and tons of gold, and securing the cedars of Lebanon to build it, and this grand building that he built for the Lord. But he took 13 years building his house. Okay, 13 years. So 20 years. Now, can you imagine how grand they called it the Palace of the Cedars of Lebanon, or the Forest of Lebanon was what that was called. How grand that palace was if you took 13 years to build it. So there's a lot there. King Solomon, verse 11, King Solomon gave 20 towns in Galilee to Hiram, the king of Tyre, because Hiram had supplied him with all the cedar and pine and gold that he wanted for these two building projects. But when Hiram went from Tyre to see the towns that Solomon had given him, he was not pleased with them. What kind of towns are these that you have given me, my brother? He asked, and he called them the land of Kabul. Kabul means worthless. Okay, you gave me 20 towns, and these towns are worthless. That's what that means. A name they have to this day. Now, Hiram had sent to the king 120 talents of gold. That's about 4.5 tons of gold. Okay. And he said, look, this is not exactly a fair exchange that I'm getting here. I sent you 4.5 tons of gold and you gave me 20 towns, but these 20 towns, there's nothing to write home about here. Okay. So he's got a relationship with Hiram, who is the king of Tyre. Verse number 15, here's the account of the forced labor Solomon conscripted to build the Lord's temple in his own palace, the supporting terraces, the walls of Jerusalem, and Hazor, Megiddo, Gezer. Now here in parentheses, notice this, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, who was his father-in-law, had attacked and captured Gezer, and he had set it on fire, and he killed its Canaanite inhabitants, and then he gave it as a wedding gift to his daughter, Solomon's wife, and Solomon rebuilt Gezer. I know some of you might have gotten a present from your in-laws when you got married. How many of you inherited a town? Okay. Solomon did. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Why didn't you get a town? Okay. Yeah. We got a toaster. You got a town. Okay. So here you go. Here you go. Okay. And Solomon also, he built up Lower Beth Horon, Baalath, Tadmor in the desert within his land, as well as all the store cities of the towns for his chariots and for his horses, whatever he desired to build in Jerusalem and in Lebanon and throughout all the territory that he ruled. So let me just back up just a little bit. So there, in these verses, there are 6 cities that he has built or rebuilt. Now, I sometimes in my work, I have clients who work construction, and they do big construction projects. I mean, big, large conglomerate buildings, but never have I heard of a construction company building a city, let alone 6 of them. Okay. Now, when you compare this also in terms of, it said he had these towns for his chariots and his horses. When you look at 2 Chronicles chapter 9, verse 25, it is almost exactly word for word for what we're reading here, but it tells us that he actually had 4,000 stalls built for his horses, 4,000 stalls, 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horses that he had in those. And so he was a builder. Okay. He had these great visions of not just building a palace or the temple, but entire cities. And so he conscripted a lot of people to help with that. Verse number 20, all the people left from the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. These people were not Israelites. That is, their descendants remaining in the land, whom the Israelites could not exterminate. These Solomon conscripted for his slave labor force, and as it is to this day. But Solomon did not make slaves of any of the Israelites. They were his fighting men, his government officials, his officers, his captains, the commanders of his chariots and charioteers. They were also his chief officials in charge of Solomon's projects. 550 officials supervising the men who did the work. Let me just back up here. Some of you have jobs where you're in charge of people. People report to you. Okay. He had 550 people who were in charge of his building projects that were reporting to him. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. And that is just one enterprise that we're talking about. That is Solomon the builder. Okay. Ever talk about Bob the builder? Bob the builder. Yes, he can. Can he build it? Yes, he can. Well, Solomon was a builder. And can he build it? Yes, he can. He really can. Okay. So he was this entrepreneur. Now, also, if you look at Second Chronicles, chapter 8, 9, and 10, it also talks about his army. His army. So as the leader of the army, he has another 250 people that are reporting to him in charge of the army. So you're talking about how great was Solomon. As a builder, what did he do? He built cities. Okay. As a leader, how many people did he supervise? Well, for the building projects, he's supervising 550. For the army, he's supervising 250. If I do my math right, I think that's 800 people that are direct reports of Solomon. That's a lot of people to manage. Okay. That is a lot of people. Well, what else did he do? What did he do as a spiritual leader? Verse number 24, after Pharaoh's daughter had come up from the city of David to the palace of Solomon he had built for her, he constructed the supporting terraces. And 3 times a year, Solomon sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings on the altar he had built for the Lord, burning incense before the Lord along with them. And so he fulfilled the temple obligations. So as the leader, and in many cases, the spiritual leader of Israel, he's going up and he is leading these sacrifices and this worship. So he is not just the leader of the army. He's not just a leader of building projects. He is a spiritual leader. He is taking that obligation seriously. Well, let's talk about Solomon, the business trader. Let's keep on going here. King Solomon also built ships at Ezion-Geber, which is near Elath and Edom on the shore of the Red Sea. And Hiram sent his men, sailors who knew the sea, to serve the fleet with Solomon's men. They sailed to Ophir and brought back 420 talents of gold, which they delivered to King Solomon. First of all, let's talk about how much gold that is. That's 16 tons worth of gold. Where are these places that we're talking about? Well, if you flip your paper over, I've got a map, because every good lesson should have a map, right? Okay, so Ezion-Geber is on this little, there's the Red Sea. My map on your paper goes farther, shows the entire Red Sea as it goes down between Africa and what is now Saudi Arabia. And this little jet up into modern day Jordan is where they think Ezion-Geber was. Now, the king of Tyre's up here. Okay, Jerusalem's down here. And they went into what used to be called Edom, and they built a port here. Now, you could see why, if Hiram from Tyre and his men are sailors, which they were going out into the Mediterranean Sea, and they were doing trade through Northern Africa and Europe and these places. But Solomon has the insight to say, let's build another naval port, and we can tap into more wealth somewhere else. So you're getting your wealth here. Let's go here. So they're going to a place called Ophir. Ophir is an interesting place because we don't really know where it's at. And you might have, they did a whole TV series and movies called King Solomon's Mines, right? You've heard of that. Okay. Where did that gold come from? Where did that much gold come from? Nobody knows for sure. There's a lot of theories. I put some on here. So it could be in Saudi Arabia. That would make the most sense because it was the closest. But it would be down this coast and here, and they found some old mines that have remnants of gold in them. Or it could be somewhere in Africa, Sri Lanka or Zimbabwe, which is on the very southern tip of Africa. There are some people who believe that they went to India. Okay. Some people believe that they went to the Philippines or Indonesia. There are also some people who think that they sailed all the way to America. And I think that's a little far-fetched. But anyway, they found gold in a place called Ophir, and they found a lot of it. So he was a trader in that respect. So what did Solomon have to say about all this success, all this greatness that he had. He comes to the end of his life and he has really done all these great things. What does he have to say? Turn to Ecclesiastes. You ready for this? Some of you already know. Some of you already know. Yes. Ecclesiastes, the word of the teacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. It's meaningless. What does a man gain from all his labor at which he toils under the sun? Generations come, generations go, the earth remains forever. The sun rises, it sets, it hurries back where it rises. The wind blows to the south, it turns to the north. Round and round it goes, everything returning on its course. All streams flow to the sea, and yet the sea is never full. To the place where the streams come from, they return again. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, there's something new? It was here already long ago. It was here before our time. If there is no remembrance of men when they're old, even those who are yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow. Wow. Wow. Here's a man who had more wealth than we can really imagine. When they're measuring gold in tons, he had more wealth than most of us can imagine. He had more success in what he did in multiple areas than most of us can fathom. And he comes to the end of his life and he looks back on it all and he says, this was meaningless. I was like chasing the wind. It blows this way, it blows that way, and my life was just chasing the wind around. Now, why would somebody say that at the end of their life? Has he just become this cantankerous old man who has nothing left to do? He's done it all, and he's bored, and so he's looking back, and he's shaking his fist with anger and saying, it was a wasted life. Why is he saying this?
I don't understand, because did he lose his relationship with God? Because life is all about God and your relationship with Jesus Christ. And if you have that, you don't need to have gold and all this other things, because Jesus Christ is enough. So I don't understand why was he a sinner? I mean, was he unrighteous?
Well, we're all sinners, and yes, he was unrighteous at times. At times he did the right thing, and at times he did not do the right thing. Okay? His wealth and his prestige kind of did him in at times. Yeah.
Kind of sounds spoiled and entitled.
Oh, spoiled and entitled. Okay. Maybe there's some of that going on here. He grew up rich. He became richer as an adult. Maybe so. Okay. Anybody else have any theories here? Yeah, John.
Yeah, maybe it just was too easy. We never had to work at anything. Never had to struggle to get a degree or, just.
I don't know. Maybe. Yeah.
He didn't value it because it didn't cost him anything.
Okay. Patty?
It's like the proverbial chasing that dream, because, that's why people get into addictions and things, because it's to fill a void, it's to fill an emptiness.
Yes.
So, it's like, oh, you get this house, and it's like, oh, but I can get a bigger house or fancier house or whatever.
Yeah.
And you're always striving for more, but your soul is empty. You've obtained possessions, but your soul is empty.
Maybe you're onto
There's
something.
emptiness.
Maybe you're onto something. Okay. So Solomon's going to break down his life in these next few verses 12 through 223, into different phases, and listen to what he has to say. So he's going to break it down to his pursuit of wisdom and learning, his pursuit of pleasure through drinking fine wine, his pursuit of fulfillment and building great projects. We just talked about some of those great projects. The pursuit of the accumulation of wealth through commerce, and the pursuit of pleasure through music and women and anything he desired. Okay? Now, before we go there, is that not what we find our world chasing after?
Yes.
Okay, let me go through this again. Pursuit of wisdom and learning. Do people pursue wisdom thinking it's going to fulfill them? I go after this degree, then I go after that degree, and I need to get to this level. And they'll tell me at work, if I go back to school and I get this, then I can achieve this level. And it's just a piling on of wisdom and knowledge. Okay. Is there a pursuit of pleasure through drinking fine wine? Yeah. Yeah. Is there a pursuit of fulfillment and great building projects? If I could just build this, if I could just make this. Is there a pursuit of accumulation of wealth through commerce? Yeah. If I get more money, it's going to make me happy, right? Is there the pursuit of pleasure through music or women or men or anything you desire? Yeah. A very hedonistic society we live in. Yeah.
I can tell you two people in my own circle of family. One of the people, I won't say who and everything, has the most money of anyone I've ever met, and they are the most unhappy of anyone I've ever met. Okay, and the other one, literally number one at Purdue, number one at Purdue.
Be careful.
You can't beat that.
Yeah.
And has
Be
3
careful.
degrees and has been in the hospital suicidal for 18 years.
Sure.
So there's two perfect examples of wisdom doesn't get you anywhere, and neither does money.
If God is
I
in
mean,
it,
knowledge. No.
if God is in it, yeah. But if
Neither
God's
one of
not
those
in it,
guys, to this day, neither one of
you
them.
are
No.
chasing the wind. Listen to what he has to say. This is very interesting to me. This is a man who had it all. This is a man who had it all. This is the sort of thing that people are pursuing. They would love to be Solomon. Listen to what he has to say. I, the teacher, was the king over Israel and Jerusalem. I devoted myself to study and to explore by wisdom all that was done under heaven. What a heavy burden God has laid on men. I have seen all the things that are done under heaven, and all of them are meaningless. They're chasing after the wind. What is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I thought to myself, look, I have grown and I've increased in wisdom more than anyone who ever ruled in Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to understanding of wisdom. And I also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. And the more knowledge, the more grief. The more I know, the more I hurt inside. Okay? Yeah. And chapter 2, I thought in my heart, come now, I'll test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is foolish. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was worthwhile for men to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and I had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired men and women singers and a harem as well, and the delights of a heart of a man. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. And all this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work. And I was, and this was the reward for my labor. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. It was chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Then I turned myself to consider wisdom. And also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what he has been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise man has eyes in his head while the fool walks in darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. And then I thought in my heart, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said in my heart, this too is meaningless. For the wise men, like the fool, will not be long remembered. In the days to come, both will be forgotten. Like the fool, the wise men must die. Let's keep on going. So I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it was meaningless. It was a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things that I toiled for under the sun because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool. Yet he will have control over all the work into which I have poured my effort and my skill under the sun. This, it too, is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome work under the sun. For a man may do his work with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then he must leave all he owns to someone who has not worked for it. This too is meaningless. It's a great misfortune. What does a man get for all the toil and anxious striving with which he labors under the sun? All his days, his work is pain and grief, and even at night, his mind does not rest. This too is meaningless. Aren't you inspired today? Don't you feel good? No, it's not a good feeling. All right? It's not a good feeling. So what in the world is he saying? Why does he call it all meaningless? And why does he conclude from his cynical backward glance of life? Why is he doing this? Yeah, Bill.
I think verse 16 sums it up. He has everything, he's achieved everything, he can do anything he wants. The one thing he can't do is live forever. He knows he's gonna die.
Okay. He sees the end coming. Might be onto something.
He has no control.
He has no control. Okay.
Crazy, even all that money and all those, wow.
I'm the king,
You know what I mean?
and I don't have control
Because
over
money
this.
is power.
Yeah.
Well, this goes back to something
Yeah.
somebody mentioned before. He really, none of this stuff was that hard for him because he was the king. And so he was building all these things without going through the government red tape because he was the government.
Right.
He inscripted people to do the work. He wasn't doing these things. He was overseeing them, but he wasn't out there pounding nails and cutting down the cedars of Lebanon. And
That's true, but he still had the weight of making it happen. And I wouldn't discount that. Okay. You've got a lot of people who are depending on you.
But I think you feel more reward when you've got some sweat in the game.
Okay.
Yes.
And he didn't, nobody was fighting him on it.
Right.
Everybody was doing what he said,
Yeah.
or he would probably, lock them up in a dungeon or have.
Well, as we're going to find out as we go through his life, that wasn't necessarily true. He had some opposition.
Okay.
He is going to have. We're
But I
going to.
compare him to like people today. Okay. And honestly, Donald Trump keeps coming to my mind. A person
Okay.
that has a lot of wealth
Yeah.
and who built a lot of things.
Right.
Okay. But he had more struggle in that, more opposition in that. He had some bankruptcies. He had some things that didn't go perfectly. He wasn't the king.
Yeah.
He didn't oversee
Exactly.
everybody that he would have liked to have been, but didn't oversee everybody that, he still had to, he wasn't in the same situation.
Let's bring this into
I
the
think
New
there's more
Testament.
reward when there's more skin in the game.
Okay. Let's bring this into the New Testament because I think maybe the thing that's missing here, Nancy touched on a little while ago. Okay. Where's God in all this? I don't think he's mentioned God once, has he?
No.
Except to say that God has put this upon me. God has given me all this, and it's a weight that's hard to bear. but God coming underneath him and holding him up. So I want to take a look at a couple of scriptures that Paul writes. Ephesians chapter 4, 17 through 24. Would somebody read that for us? Who wants that one? I'm going to give that to Cynthia.
So I tell you this, and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do, in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they are full of greed. That, however, is not the way of life you learned when you heard about Christ and were taught in him in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. You were taught, with regard to your former way of life, to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness.
Okay. So let's put a New Testament twist on this, and that is this. To really live as a great man and to be fulfilled in your life, you have to take off what is we call our sinful nature. It has to be removed. Otherwise, it's going to keep pursuing things that are not going to fulfill you. And you could become extremely successful in the eyes of the world around you and get to the point in your life where you look back on it and say, it's meaningless. Okay? Yeah.
So it's interesting how a man that was so incredibly wise kind of missed the biggest signpost there in a way, because he was focusing on the material more so than the spiritual, right?
And isn't it easy, though,
And
even if we're following Christ, to do that?
exactly. And he fell into the same pitfalls as his father by starting to get in with all these other cultures and women and all this kind of stuff, which like the evil one will do, will pull your attention away from the real substance of what it's all about. And in all of his wisdom, I mean, it's like boiling the frog in the hot water, not feeling it, that was just a steady pull away. And he wasn't recognizing that was what was happening to him, because he was taking his focus off of what the true meaning was that he needed to be aware of.
Okay, we're going to come back to that. Yeah, Jeff.
And Ecclesiastes 2:24-25.
Don't read ahead. Don't read ahead. Don't read ahead. No. That's coming. Okay. Jeff the jumping ahead. The forerunner. I'll come back to you. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
So in Ecclesiastes 2, verse 18, it says, I hated all things I toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to one who comes after me. And who knows if that person is going to be a knucklehead or not, right?
Right.
There's no talk in here at all about his children and his legacy and the training of a family. There's nothing.
There is nothing there.
Nothing.
His dad talked a lot about it.
Yeah.
In the Psalms. Yeah. But he's not talking about that.
He clearly raised a bunch of knuckleheads, right?
Well, he might have. He might have. I want to take a look at another New Testament scripture, and that would be out of Philippians chapter 3, verse the second half of 4 through 4:1. And in this scripture, Paul is talking about his own life. Now, Paul's not as successful and as rich as Solomon, but listen to what he said about his former way of life. 3:4b. If anyone else thinks he has reason to put confidence in the flesh, I have more. I was circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, in regard to the law, a Pharisee, as for zeal, persecuting the church, as for legalistic righteousness, faultless. Hang on. How many of us could say as a young man or a young person that we had lived such a perfect life, so we thought that we could look at our life and say it's faultless at this point? It's faultless, but that's what he said. That's what he believed. I was a faultless person. But whatever was to my profit, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Christ, Jesus, my Lord. For the sake, I have lost all things. I consider them rubbish, that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ. The righteousness that comes from God is by faith. I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, so somehow to attain the resurrection from the dead. He is basically saying, my life prior to Christ belonged in the trash can.
Wow.
You could take it down the hallway and flush it down the toilet. All my great learning, all my passion, all, throw it away. Throw it away, because it was without Christ. And I have to have Christ in me. Okay, that's the big thing. That's what's making me great. That's what's opened up my life. That's what does it. Okay, so that's what Paul concluded. Let's go back, Jeffrey. Let's go back and find out what Solomon concluded. Okay, what Solomon concluded. So, chapter 2, you want to read it, 24 through 26? Yep.
In the Living Bible. So I decided that there was nothing better for a man to do than to enjoy his food and drink and his job. Then I realized that even this pleasure is from the hand of God. For who can eat or enjoy apart from him? For God gives those who please him wisdom. For God gives those who please him wisdom, knowledge, and joy. But if a sinner becomes wealthy, God takes the wealth away from him and gives it to those who please him. So here, too, we see an example of foolishly chasing the wind.
Yeah. So what he is concluding here, he went on a long rant. Okay. This is an old man who went on a long rant talking about his life. And he comes to this point where he said, what can a man do to really find happiness? He can accept what God gives him, the food and drink, and he can accept that, and he can enjoy that and realize it's from the hand of God, or the work that God gives him, what God has granted him. You can take that from God's hand, or you can deny God, and you can try to accumulate all this stuff like I have accumulated and the success that I have, and you will find yourself where I am sitting right now, chasing the wind, just chasing the wind. Let me ask you a question. Why are people so unhappy in our world? Have you noticed that people are really, really, really unhappy? And we have more stuff and more opportunity than we have ever had in the history of the world, but people are really, really, really unhappy. Why? What's on the inside? That's where Solomon is. He's looking back and he's realizing something. If God's not in this, I'm chasing the wind. All right, I'm long. Any other comments or questions?
That's great.
We're going to spend some more time in Ecclesiastes, and it's unlike any other book of the Bible. It is a really, honestly, there's more of this. There's more of this. Stick with us, because it's a great book to learn from. It's a great book for this generation of people to learn from, because there's a whole lot of chasing after the wind in our world. Yep. All right. Let's have a word of prayer and I'll turn you loose. Dear Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you for a class that digs in and studies your word. Help us to be people who realize that this is more than just an old story about an old king who accumulated it all. It's a story meant for us, and help us to apply it to our lives. We ask this in your name. Amen. All right, turn you loose.
So.
He did give us the proverb.